Oh, hello there. My name is Mark Loveless. I am a senior security researcher with Gitlab, and I'm going to be presenting today. I'm going to be talking about a lot about zero trust. Uh, the talk is entitled "No Perimeter, No VPN, No Problem," and that will become hopefully readily apparent what we're talking about here really quick. For the agenda, I'll talk a little bit about GitLab itself, and then I will also get into GitLab's zero trust methodology. And then from there, we'll move on to how we actually implemented Okta at GitLab. And then from there, also cover a few tips and tricks that we kind of picked up along the way, some success stories, if you will. So first off, about GitLab, we are a web-based DevOps lifecycle tool, and what that means is that when people are writing code, they need to be able to manage code, and as a SaaS company, we provide a way to do that. We also have an on-prem product as well if someone is so inclined, but for the most part, this is what we have. We eat our own dog food. We actually use this ourselves to put out the GitLab product. We are an extremely fast-growing global company, and that's going to become readily apparent when I get into some of the details as we move forward. We are fairly unique as a company goes. It may sound cool, but as a member of the security team, all I can say is that it is anything but cool. It is challenging. I do have fun at my job, don't get me wrong. It's very challenging, very rewarding, but it is certainly not an easy task to be able to pull this off. So let's go ahead and kind of move forward here. Talk a little bit about zero trust. I think everyone's pretty much familiar with zero trust and whatnot. And I wanted to talk about how that kind of plays into our decisions in some of the vendors that we've chosen to work with over time, including GitLab, or including Okta, I'm sorry. Okay, so traditionally, what you end up having with most companies is the solution for doing zero trust. They talk about removing the perimeter. We're going to, because your perimeter is diminishing, you're getting, a lot more emphasis on not having a perimeter per se. So there's everyone talks about dismantling the VPN. You're not going to need that VPN anymore. And most companies, they just have a few remote workers. And so a lot of the vendors that we've talked with, they say, no, you may have a few remote workers. We need to make sure we are able to transition and handle them. And most companies at this point, there's a mix of on-prem and cloud. There's a few companies out there that are cloud only, but most of them have some semblance of on-prem still. And asset management is just assumed. It's just naturally assumed, oh, well, you guys probably already have all of your employees' computers all, taken care of and everything. That's them. For us, there's a very harsh reality, and that is that we have no perimeter. We've never had a perimeter, ever. So therefore, we've never had a corporate VPN. There's been no need for one. Everything has been just without the perimeter, working in the cloud. We are all remote. We are the largest all remote company in the world. Just nothing but remote workers. And so that's, that takes people aback, particularly if they're, a vendor trying to pitch a solution of, hey, we're gonna help out, and we might be able to take care of those remote workers. Well, we're nothing but remote. And like I mentioned, we're all cloud, so we're completely cloud-based with all the various applications and stuff we use. And believe it or not, we have limited asset management. We have a pretty good handle on our infrastructure as far as what we have running in the cloud. But as far as GitLab and GitLab.com, for example, what we have there, where we store our customers' data, we have pretty good handle on that. But as far as users' laptops and whatnot, that's a completely different story. That's a little bit different. We're working on it, but we're not there yet. There are some other issues, and these involve culture. We're open core with our product, and what that means is that the core of the GitLab product is an open source product. And so that means that anybody out there can contribute code to it and whatnot. It is completely open source. Now, we do, as a company, for added features and stuff like that, we do have things that are that you pay for and get with the product, but the core of it is open source, and so we refer to that as open core. We are more than open core with our culture as a company. Like I said, we allow people from outside the company to, like, if they find a bug, they can contribute and say, hey, well, I found a bug, I want to fix it. Here you go. Here's a code fix for you. So we have people checking in code from all over the places. It's not just, we've kind of adapted this to everything. So all of our documentation is also very open source. Our corporate manual, for example, is up and online for anyone and everyone to see and to add to it. If there's someone even that doesn't even work here that says, hey, you should include this, they can submit an MR, and we'll go through the whole process and see about getting it approved. It's happened. It'll happen again. And that's what I mean by, more inclusive than just our employees. It does come down to just the to everyone we encounter out there. We also have some corporate issues we have to keep in mind when we've been kind of looking at this whole zero trust thing. We've got a pending IPO. As an open company, they announced several years ago, hey, in November 2020, we're going to do an IPO. And that's documented in our manual, and that is the direction we are still at this time heading. And so with that pending, there's like a lot of things that come up as a result. Compliance issues, there's auditing issues as well. These are huge issues for us to overcome, particularly because of the amount of growth that we've had as a company. The growth has just been absolutely insane as far as our. We've grown in revenue, we've grown in employees, everything, and we're, as a result of growing employees and being all remote. We are, this complicates the compliance issue, since we're in other jurisdictions. We're all over the planet. And on top of that, as a company, we're going to have the normal security objectives that are needed just to make things happen, to make things work as a corporation. So those are in play. Essentially, we're a bleeding edge company, and bleeding edge, again, is just like, oh, you're very unique. You've got this bleeding edge thing going on, and so as a result, with this whole bleeding edge, it's not like we can go somewhere and ask someone, hey, can you help me with this? What did you guys do when you encountered this issue or this situation with your company? We end up finding out that the answer to that is, you're doing what? I had no idea. And so you get this real interesting world you end up living in as a result of that. I'll talk about a few pain points here. Now, classifying our data is, we do have a process for it, but the thing that's interesting is that our data classification is fluid. We have 4 different levels of data classification, green being public, and then there's yellow, then orange, and then red being the most sensitive data that we might have. So like some really sensitive employee data that's pertinent to HR and whatnot, or customer data that we want to protect customer data at all costs. And so there are times when, from the time one logs in the morning until the time when they log out, that the classification of that data can change. And so there's this fluidity associated with that data classification, where you can say, well, okay, in the morning when I logged in, data was green, and then later in the day it became red, and now it's split, and it's like part of it is orange and part of it is now green again. And so and this happens a lot within the company, and that's just the nature of us trying to kind of map out our data to make sure we get classification going. This is something that we've encountered. Provisioning and deprovisioning of users is hard, simply because when you have a ton of SaaS applications out there and you're trying to create accounts for all these users, it becomes a real chore to track down who's responsible for what SaaS application, and while they're not doing their regular job, can you step back and create this new account, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of a mess. And like I said, we just barely have end user asset management. To give you an idea, at this point when I'm recording this, I think they started buying employee laptops maybe 2.5 years ago. And before that, it was BYOD. And so we have employees that are here at the company now that are still using a BYOD laptop. And so that's part of that culture. That's where that comes from. So just even buying our employees laptops to use is a somewhat new concept for this company. So it's interesting, very interesting. Now, zero trust in itself, it sounds awesome when you kind of hear the elevator pitch on zero trust, but there doesn't seem to be any agreement on the various vendors as to what zero trust actually is. And everyone keeps referring to Google's BeyondCorp model, and that's fine. They can go ahead and refer to that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what's going to work for us. We like the idea of it, but the BeyondCorp model was intended for somebody else, not for us. No vendor has a complete solution. That's the one thing right there that we immediately noticed, because we had needs in a whole bunch of different areas, and there's just not a single vendor that covers every single instance of stuff that we need. And as I get into it here, you'll see what I'm talking about. Basically, what we've encountered a lot is we've seen a vendor that isn't Google, and they're trying to sell an incomplete version of an internal Google solution to Gitlab, and that's just not going to cut it. That's just not going to work. For our definition of zero trust, I'll go through this one at a time. User identification. We want to ensure that the user is who they say they are. That's number one there. Number two, we want to ensure the device that they are authenticating with, that device, we recognize that device and we know that that device is approved to contact Gitlab. Data classification, we need to have all of our data classified so we can make decisions when it comes to whether we're going to allow access. So we're going to make sure that we have data classification, we have access controlled systems where we can actually go through and say, okay, these systems have these controls in place, and we can do this and that via policies to define whether they actually gain access to that data. There is a whole grab bag of things that are kind of extra that I wanted to kind of talk about. We have a need to make sure that all data that's in transit is encrypted. That's a big thing for us. We want to have very full, very robust logging because we want to collect all this logging data from all these different systems, not just from what the vendor solutions, but our own systems, and be able to pull these together into one cohesive log that we can look at. We need to make sure that we also have support for a CDN front end so that we're able to make sure that when we have the CDN out there and they have all these different parameters and parameters and whatnot associated with their communication and with us, that it actually is going to work. And also, while some of these things are not necessarily zero trust related, if we're going to come up with the solutions for some of these things, we've got to make sure that the solution doesn't eliminate our ability to do something zero trust later on. And so that's kind of an important point there. Our rough plan is to not focus so much on zero trust networking as a whole, as much as just say, if it's zero trust-ish, then we're going to, that's probably good enough for us to consider. So if something's kind of in the realm of zero trust, or we can kind of make it work out mentally, then we'll go ahead and go for that. We have to make sure that we're going to reduce everything to basics. All these different things that we have out there, if we reduce these down to basics, it's going to be easier. There'll be chunks that we can actually deal with, and then we just basically go through and then solve each one. So every little chunk of thing that we have, we just go through and just solve each one of those one at a time. That also allows us to do things like find budget for some of these individual things. And then we have to make sure that everything all still talks to each other, that everything's all still tied together. So that's pretty important as well. All right, so now we're getting to why we ended up going with Okta, what the relationship there, how that kind of came about. There was a few reasons why we chose Okta at the time. Well, now we have, I forget what we had at the time that we first approached Okta. It was something like 70, 80 SaaS applications. It's over 100 now. So, but that was the kind of thing. But just even cataloging what we had was a problem. And the other thing too is that we needed something to be able to support different identity methods, so that we could actually talk to these different systems with whatever identity solution we had. That was pretty important to us. Like I said, the growth rate has been absolutely tremendous. So we were, I think, around the time we started this, we were around 350 employees, and we are over 1,200 and still growing. So there's, in the past 12 months, that's basically what it's looked like. It's just been absolutely crazy. As a result, onboarding and offboarding has been an absolute massive time sink. Just getting accounts built and making sure you find all these accounts as when they leave. You don't want to end up saying, hey, where's, why is, Fred's accounts on this system? Who's Fred? And someone says, oh, he worked here a year ago. You don't want that scenario to crop up, particularly if Fred had administrative access to something. Just the growth rate there is incredible. And like I said earlier, we're leading up to an IPO. With all this growth and expansion into new areas, it's really put a huge burden upon making sure that, for compliance and various audit requirements that we have going forward. So, SOC 2, PCI, ISO, there's things that we have to make sure we're ready for, and we need some semblance of control over our environment and ability to kind of prove our environment, as it were. So how do we do this? This was kind of an interesting thing here. We did what we, and in our tradition of being an open company, so to speak, we did what we called an open beta. So we did have some, basically there was staff that had vested interest in what we were doing, and we had vested interest in making sure that their department was covered. We put together this open beta, and basically anyone could, and we put it out to the whole company, just as anyone can join up for this and give us your opinion. We welcome your feedback. And I think the entire security team, and there were some parts of other parts of engineering that also went ahead and opted in to participate in the open beta. We were able to, when you had those people opt in for it voluntarily, they had concerns, and they were able to bring a lot of those up. Being able to present to them, just to give you an example of this, different multi-factor options, that played a big part, because we had people that just said, what is this Okta Verify app? I don't want to load an app on my phone. This is my personal phone. I don't want work apps on it, and would, really have, there'd be a lot of passion against doing that. It's like, okay, well, that's fine. How do you feel about using U2F, or, just this YubiKey, and using that? And we also allowed for TOTP, so they could use, some other, like if they're using, like, say, Google Authenticator or something like that on their phone, then we gave them another option where they could do that. And having a product that supported all of that really played a big part in addressing a lot of the concerns that people had. And that really helped with the beta. Now, then we did, in the May, June of last year, we started our live deployment. And that was interesting too. We did start with what we refer to as non-critical apps, but we also included GitLab.com itself. So that made kind of for an interesting challenge right there. So that was good. And we did learn a lot of some of the common pitfalls and whatnot. And we were also, not only we were building up trust with the users, but we were building up our own trust in the product itself. It's just like, okay, this is really working. I think this is really going to work well. And that led us to the next step, which was July through October, was critical app deployment. And these were the apps that were, absolutely there were some critical things associated with those. To get through that, there was a lot of over communication, where we had a dedicated Slack channel. We had, just for people that had concerns about stuff. We actually had that during the open beta as well, come to think of it. We did allow for a lot of ways to get feedback from it, but just the main thing is just like, constant communication. This app here is now moving into Okta. This app over there is now moving into Okta and kind of moving forward. And just really, we had a lot of different scenarios as a result of that we had to test. I'll kind of talk about that here in just a second. Like I said, our key challenges and obstacles, it was the getting the users to adopt and change over to this. Even though we're the security department, coming in and saying, hey, the security team wants you to do the security stuff because of security, that wasn't a good way to get users to just jump on board. What we were doing, we were saying, there is a user experience here that is going to be easier for you. And you're just going to have to sign in once, and then you have this dashboard, and you can click on where the apps you need to go to. And that kind of really helped by just saying, look at how we're going to improve things for you. So that made a huge difference right there. Another thing that was kind of a hard thing to deal with was a lot of this was production first implementation. And by that, I mean, just like you have a SaaS company, they have an application that you're using. They may not have a full and working dev environment or test environment. You just go with it. That's it. You don't have much of a choice. It's just you either implement it or you don't. So for some of this, it was kind of a hold your breath. We think this is going to work, and then we would just go for it. And with some applications, we had challenges where it was an all or nothing. It was either all Okta or no Okta. And others that we could do Okta, but we could also configure it to where we can, not have Okta and kind of stage through the whole process, and that kind of helped right there. But still, it's just like these, when you're doing these cutovers, a lot of these SaaS providers, they weren't used to this kind of thing, and so they wouldn't necessarily have support on speed dial to say, hey, we got to reconfigure this entire SaaS instance here and make it work. And in the meantime, we can't use it, and it's just critical to the company. So it was that part was pretty challenging, but we did get through it. SaaS application debt. Now, basically what I'm talking about here is that you had application owners that didn't understand how their SaaS application worked. So we may have someone, let's say, for example, for some SaaS application that was used by sales. They're experts in sales. They're not experts in IT. And then even if they do have plenty of experience with IT and IT issues, they may not be as well versed with security elements of that and InfoSec. And it's just when you go to someone and says, hey, does the SaaS application that you're in charge of, does it handle SAML? And they look at you and say, who's SAML? We don't know who this guy is. Then you realize, okay, well, we got a little bit of a thing here. And so that's what I'm talking about with the SaaS application debt, is that we found ourselves going in and doing this to just cutting edge, bleeding edge kind of approach to this stuff. We uncovered a lot of things that we didn't expect to uncover. So going through the process, when that kind of thing happens, you just deal with it. But that was quite a thing just to have to be able to take that on. There were also some new help desk challenges that came out of this as well. I changed my phone became the new password reset. That was the big one, particularly because they're using either they've got their authenticator app for TOTP or they're using Okta Verify, something like that. It became kind of complicated, and so just there was new processes and procedures that we had to put together for the help desk. That was interesting. Now on to some success stories. Getting our tech stack actually cataloged was great. And we had kind of a rule that we're now able to enforce where we say, if it's not an Okta, it doesn't get approved. And so it's got to be able to either be an Okta, talk to Okta, interact with Okta, and before it's going to get approved out there. And I think the tipping point really came for this. We started having app owners come to us, and they would be just like, "Hey, we're running this SaaS application, XYZ," and we're like, "We've never heard of that. We don't even know that app existed, yet alone that we own it and are using it as a company." And so they would come to us because they wanted it in the dashboard, and they also heard from from their coworkers that, hey, just if you're running an app, you put it in Okta, and then you don't have to create all the accounts anymore. And so we had people hunting us down. So we realized, okay, this is documented enough that we're actually making some real progress. And so that kind of helps. Onboarding and offboarding. Now, when we onboard people, into any company, you usually have this huge template, this list of items that you're going to go through that are going to like make sure they're signed up for benefits, make sure that their payroll stuff is in place and all that. And there's like this huge list of things. Well, a lot of it is creating accounts in various systems. There's like this base level of accounts that need to be created. And then also based upon their particular job description, there may be other SaaS applications that they need access to. Someone in accounting may need something different than, say, someone in sales or someone in engineering. So that onboarding template, we were able to reduce that by over a third simply by going with Okta, because all of a sudden, to give you an example, when I first started, I think it was about 3 weeks typically for a new user. This is like in February of 2019, before we started doing the Okta stuff. It could be 3 weeks before I get access to all the different systems that I need to get access to. And that was ridiculous. But the thing is just like it just took time. And that portion of it, creating all those accounts, because we'll see right now, we use Bamboo HR for our HR product, and then a new user is created in Bamboo HR, and then that is immediately exported into Okta, and then from Okta, that is immediately, we're creating accounts in all these other systems, and that's pretty much all automated at this point. So there are some exceptions, because there are a few SaaS applications that aren't perfect and they don't follow the exact rules we'd like them to follow and whatnot. But nonetheless, it took it down to, from 3 weeks down to just, a minute. It was just like insane. So it really reduced the onboarding stuff. And the other thing with that is that it allowed for just nearly real-time offboarding with automation, to be able to, because if we can create all those accounts, we can also disable them at the same time when it came time for offboarding. So that was absolutely phenomenal to be able to do that. So that was a huge success story for us. The whole application legacy debt situation. This provisioning thing, it just allowed 3 to 10% of human error accounts that not deprovisioned to be actually caught. So we're talking about, Fred having that account from a year ago. You're going through this and you're in the process. You can see this. You can see where the mistakes happen, see where they occur, and we're catching some of these human error things as a result. And so this helps with security. It certainly helps with, an audit, like, that kind of thing, when they're going through looking to see what accounts you have there, and to know that they're right and those people are supposed to be there. That's phenomenal. It's a wonderful thing to be able to do. It's also allowed us to eliminate a lot of shared accounts. That's always something that plagues companies is shared accounts. Yeah, that's fantastic. We're just grateful that we can be able to just like put in a policy, a group within a policy, and these people have access to do this. So you can actually see who's performing that action or whatnot via some specialized account. So that's wonderful. The compliance controls, that's all been just like dramatically simplified, and that's really improved the speed on some of the things. Some of the verification and stuff that we had to go through with auditing, that went from weeks to hours, and that's just phenomenal. And it's simply because you can get to everything and be able to export stuff out and say, hey, look, here's this, here's that, and it just is wonderful. The other thing it helped with compliance is just being able to have password standardization, and then just have these just more or less kind of just policies that just simplified the entire compliance process for us. So that was just because they're just across the board. They just worked everywhere. As a company, since we're global, I mean, we're all over the place. We're in something like, I think, 65, 66 countries at this point. And so you have different compliance issues that crop up in all these different locations. And so what happens is you can actually say, well, okay, this one is strict up to this point here, and this one over here says, well, you've got to be at, on a scale of 1 to 10, you got to be at least a 6 or a 7 or something like that. Anyway, you can just say, let's just go to the highest standard that we need to cover each thing, and then just push that out everywhere. This helps with that, and you have to end up doing that to kind of, just make sure you don't have, different standards for different people based upon where they're logging in from, or, where they reside, that kind of thing. This just really cuts down on a lot of that. Another one, this was Okta for ASA. This was really interesting because what we had was the infrastructure team. They had some projects coming up that were going to involve a lot of creation of accounts, and they knew that some of the people that were going to have to be creating these accounts, they're going to be pulled off their regular job and have to do this. So the infrastructure team says, hey, we've been using this Okta thing to get to everything else. Do you have anything that we could do with SSH? And it's just like, well, guess what? We've got it. We know what we can do. And so we had, we started looking at Okta for ASA. We had a planned pilot. I think maybe for a month. And in less than half the time of the pilot, by then everyone was just like, oh, this will work. We're fine. And so we just went ahead and implemented it. So just a real short pilot than what we were thinking we were going to have to do. So it was just a wonderful success to where you can just whammo, just create accounts like that. And that kind of helped with that whole everything else we've been talking about, compliance and whatnot, just there's being keeping track of accounts. And this has been fully adopted by the infrastructure team. And so they're in the process of making sure all their people and stuff are on it. And then it's going to get deployed to the rest of engineering at some point. And we're looking forward to that because we're big SSH users here. There's a few tips and tricks I wanted to go over with this too. One of the things that we learned when doing this is that we need to, we always try to focus on the benefits that you get with this. We try to sell the user experience. We make the whole thing as transparent as possible. And like I said, we expose the efficiency thing. The efficiency things usually kind of expose themselves, but those are become bonuses. Like, oh, and by the way, after you do this, it shortens this process here and there, and your productivity increases, and people usually really go for that. And later on, we expose the security benefits. It's just like we're going to meet compliance and all kinds of stuff. So that's really good. what we try to really do there, outside of selling the user experience, we just want to make it as transparent as we can. We were very upfront and open with how everything worked, what we were trying to do, what we were trying to accomplish. But just, we really did focus in, though, on, like I said, on the user experiences. And like I said, exposure after the fact as to the actual, some of the other benefits. Probably there are main reasons for doing it. The open beta and the over communication things, I can't stress that enough. That was really important and really good for us in getting buy-in from people. So just actually going through and engaging these people in and bringing them in really helped considerably as they went through it. And then just, we were able to, at that point, we were able to actually find business champions, people within the business that just said, hey, this is wonderful, this is awesome, you guys, we've got to do this. And they would be communicating it in their departments and saying, this is the way to go. Like I said, with what happened with, Okta for ASA, that whole thing, that was just like a business champion, so to speak, just came forward and said, hey, this is going to work. This is great. We try to celebrate and kind of capitalize on these successes that we had and just keep the momentum up. And so at that point, what happens is that the staff expects us to have everything in Okta. They don't, and so if it's not there, they begin to complain and say, hey, we want this in Okta, we want that in Okta, it's going to make my life easier. So by just pointing out, hey, look at what we've done so far, and kind of keeping that up, that's really helped us get this thing fully implemented within the company. So just basically, as kind of a conclusion to all this, I just wanted to go over and say that it always helps, if you're going to come up with these new ideas that are different and unique for people, to it always works better when you have end user input. That's always a big help to have. Another thing is we've been trying to do this all along in the security department, which is just like, we leave things better for the end users than when we actually started. And that benefits everybody, okay? Because if it's better for the end users and you've implemented something that you needed or wanted in there, everyone, it's just win-win. And this is something that we really discovered as well, is that if a solution is very, very hard, if it was just, extremely complex, we probably should do something else. And that's really important. And that's what it has to do with zero trust as well. A zero trust solution, it does need to make things easier. And if it doesn't, then you look for a better solution. And so, for us, this has been great. This has really worked out well for us. And so we've been very happy with the choices we've made and how things are kind of moving forward at this point. And that is pretty much the end of my presentation. I've got my contact information there in the slide, my email address, if you have questions you want to ask there. And certainly there's a whole series of blog posts that have been, if I go into some of the detail on some of these things, such as for example, data classification. I do a whole blog post on some of the issues we have with data classification. So just go explore those, and hopefully that will help you as well. But if you have questions at this point, we'd just love to actually hear what they are, and we'll try and get them answered.